everybody's enjoying their lunch. But now, for the coup de grace, the presentation of our speaker, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce to you here today and to have with us here today retired New Jersey Supreme Court Justice Janie Lavecchia. She was nominated by Governor Christine Whitman. Justice Lavecchia served for more than 21 years on the New Jersey Supreme Court, and she is the longest-serving female justice in the history of New Jersey. During her tenure, Justice Lavecchia authored over 300 court opinions that impacted every industry in the state. Before her nomination to the Supreme Court, Justice Lavecchia served as the New Jersey Commissioner of Banking and Insurance, overseeing thousands of insurance companies, banks, and credit unions. Prior to that, she held various leadership positions, including Deputy Chief Counsel in the Office of Counsel to Governor Thomas Kean. She was also the Chief Administrative Law Judge in New Jersey's Office of Administrative Law and the Director of the Division of Law within the Department of Law and Public Safety. Welcome, Justice Lavecchia. So, now they've taken away our podium. So we have a lot of notes here because, you know, when you get two lawyers in the room, we got 8 pages we got to get through. No, just kidding. So, Justice Lavecchia, thank you so much for being here. It's been a joy talking to you these past few weeks, getting to know you. It's the height of honors to be an attorney in New Jersey and get to meet a justice of the Supreme Court and get to know them so well. I have her cell phone number. Anybody want?
Normally, we get to ask the questions.
That's right.
She gets to ask them.
That's right. Yeah, so in our talks, one of the things that really impressed me was when you graduated from Rutgers Law School in 1979, so that means you went to law school in 1976, and you described this sort of confluence of social and political things that were going on at the time that really opened the door for many of the opportunities that you had as an attorney. Tell us more about that.
I really am glad to start with that question. But before I do, I noticed that when you introduced your law firm, you mentioned that everyone's a woman. I think that's wonderful. On the court, we tried to achieve that. The closest we ever got was 5 women out of 7 people, which was clearly a majority, but importantly, it was a quorum. So we really had the guys on their toes. They couldn't be late for anything because we were ready to boogie. You're alluding to the fact that there was a big change in law right as I was going to law school, or actually coming right on the heels of it. Before 1968, there were some women who were going to law school. Not a lot. I mean, we've all heard about Justice Ginsburg, Justice O'Connor going in the 1950s. Our own Justice Garibaldi graduated Columbia in 1959 with Justice Ginsburg. There were very few women going to law school back then. And if actually you looked at the numbers, it was 20 to 1, basically, men to women in law schools. They didn't really want women, I mean, to be perfectly candid. And what happened in 1968 that was the big, big sea change is that Congress got rid of the deferral for men who went to law school and other graduate programs.
For the draft, you mean for the
draft.
For the Vietnam War draft?
Yes, the Vietnam War draft. And that was causing a big stir among law school deans. It was such a big thing that 3 of them actually went down and testified to Congress to say, please don't do this because we can't let our numbers go down. We need the revenue for the law schools. So if you do this, we're going to have to admit more women. But it happened. And as a result, more women began to flood into law school, frankly, just about the time I was going. I started in the fall of 1976. So I actually rode the crest of women who began to flood into law schools in those mid-1970s. And I believe, and people have written about this, there's a book called Equal, How Women Reshaped the Law, American Law. That influx of women really changed an awful lot. One, it allowed for a great many more of us to be in the law. Two, it let us rise to levels of leadership in government and in private sector. And then eventually, when we started to hit the requisite number of years to become judges, we began to move in greater numbers into the judge position.
Did you appreciate that at the time when you went to law school, that that's what was happening?
Actually, we did, because I went to Rutgers Law School in Newark, and Rutgers was a pretty progressive school. Not everyone was as progressive as Rutgers. Cornell had just admitted about 15% women. My law school class was 47% women in the fall of 1976. It was the highest percentage in the nation, and it was being broadcast within our school because we were proud of it, as well as in the law school community.
You talked about how there was a difference between the opportunities for women in private practice versus what you were doing in public service. Talk about that and some of those opportunities that you had.
Government was among the places that first began to realize that they could get women who are graduating at the top of their class and bring them into employment. For whatever reason, the private sector was a little bit slower to appreciate the benefit of that. So when I started in the Division of Law after I graduated, there were already a good number of women there as attorneys and even as supervisors, which was great because I had wonderful role models. My colleagues who went into private practice didn't have quite the same experience. I think there were fewer women going into some of the big law communities or even smaller practices. But it was happening. It just was not at the same levels. But as a result, what that meant is that big law was always a little bit behind as women became more experienced.
When you say big law, for those non-lawyers out there, that's the big law firms.
Big law firms, big national law firms with several hundred people.
They were lagging behind what was being available to
Yes.
lawyers in public service.
Yes. So they were not moving people into equity positions and letting them take the big cases, giving them exposure to clients. And exposure to clients is everything. That's how people advance in every business, same as in law. You have to bring people along. And in government, it was happening. In private practice, it was happening, but I can't say that it was happening at the same level.
And today, it's still happening.
Yes.
In some respects.
Yeah. Sadly, there was a study done in 2017 by the American Bar Association. And they looked around and it showed that while private law firms were hiring more women initially, those numbers were good. When you looked at how many people were actually achieving equity partnerships in those firms, the numbers were dramatically lower. So what that means is they were not as successful at retaining women in higher level positions in those practices, which is unfortunate. And I think it's something that's going to be watched going forward. There's a new, I don't know if you've heard about this, but there is a thing called the Mansfield Rule in law. And I don't know if it's filtered out into business generally, but it's actually, law firms are asked to sign a commitment to try to promote and retain at least 30% women in their upper echelons. And it's being watched year to year. The American Bar Association is actually publishing reports to see how well firms are doing. Is that healthy? I'm sure it's not pleasant to be watched in such a respect, but unfortunately, I think it's bringing some good results.
Mm-hmm. When you took the position as the director of the Division of Law, what how long had you been practicing? How old were you at that? Well, if you don't mind me asking here, because I believe you were quite young at the time.
That's always been a problem. I was 40 when I took over the division.
And how many
law.
lawyers did you supervise at the division law?
450.
Wow. And you told me a little anecdote, I think, about one of your subordinates. Would you care to share that?
Actually, the anecdote you're thinking,
Oh,
we had wonderful conversations, and I'm really happy to share our intimate conversations with 100 people, because we developed this great rapport, and I was telling a lot of war stories to Rosanne, which I'm happy to share.
Well, we'll get to that, because that was another position you held, I guess, right?
Okay. Well, the anecdote you're thinking of was actually at OAL. When I joined the Office of Administrative Law as the chief ALJ, I was 35. And there were 45 judges that I was supervising. Most of them, in fact, probably every one of them was older than me. I was an outsider, and I was a woman, although there were women judges. So how was I received? I would say well. But there were some mixed episodes that happened, like this one. I was only there a short time, maybe first week or so. I think it was probably the first week. And one of the most senior male judges came up to me in a group with a lot of people around and said, Janie, if you would like, come to my courtroom, watch me, and I'll show you how to conduct a hearing. Now, part of my job was to supervise and evaluate the judges on an annual basis for the legislature and the executive branch. So obviously, I couldn't let that happen. What was going on there? Certainly a healthy ego, I would guess. In retrospect, I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. I think he was trying to be kindly, trying to be helpful, may not have realized how off-putting it was and how inappropriate it was to do that in front of other people. I did not go watch his hearings, except when I was evaluating him.
That's right.
Yeah. But rest assured, he was an excellent judge.
Good.
Yeah.
When you were with, I just want to go back to the divisional law for a second.
Sure.
450 lawyers. What was the breakdown between men and women when you got there, and then versus when you left that position?
When I got there, there was a good number of women. I don't know if it was quite 50%, but it was probably getting close in '94. It was certainly 50% at least when I left 4 years later. At that time, in the mid-'90s, we had our first female attorney general. I don't know if you remember Deborah Poritz.
Of course.
And one of the things that she did was we put a daycare center in the Justice Complex. And it did wonders for attracting and retaining young women with infants and toddlers. And even men who had childcare responsibilities would be dropping off their children at that daycare center. And it kept people, really good people, in the workforce. At that time, also, there were quite a few female supervisors, and the numbers really only rose during that era.
Mm-hmm. And when you were elevated to the Supreme Court, who'd you get the call from?
Well, all right, I'll let you in the bubble in my head. I was Commissioner of Banking and Insurance at the time. I had been there just not quite 2 years. John Farmer, who you may read his articles in the different publications, John was in the governor's inner circle. He was a very good friend of mine. And I got a call from him saying, Janie, can I come down and talk to you this afternoon? I said, sure, John, I'm here, come on down. So he came down and surprised me by saying that unexpectedly, Marie Garibaldi, who was the very first woman justice in New Jersey, had decided to step down early. She wasn't 70, she wasn't hitting the mandatory retirement age. Her mom was not doing well, and she wanted to be able to spend more time with her. So John came down to say, the governor wants to know if you would permit yourself to be considered. Now, why is it phrased that way? It's always phrased that way because you don't say no to the governor if she decides to ask you. So if you do not want to consider going down that path, you tell them right in the beginning, thank you very much, but that's not something that I would care to do.
And did your head explode?
It did. It did, but I put it back together. I talked with my husband because it would have repercussions to him. He was a lawyer also. And I said, yes, I was willing to be considered. So then nothing happened for a couple weeks. I thought, okay, that's nice. I was considered. And then out of the blue, I was still at work having a meeting. I recall, I won't say the name of the insurance company, but it was the top execs of one of the insurance companies that they like to come in and talk to the commissioner about whatever topics are of concern to them. Now, in these meetings, my assistant, Theresa, would never come in and interrupt. These are very important to the companies who make these appointments. But I got a knock on the door, and Theresa came in, and I looked at her, I was surprised, and she said, Commissioner, there's a phone call. I said, well, who is it? And she said, it's the governor's office, they want to talk to you right now. I said, okay. I excused myself. I went to the phone, and they said, the governor would like to meet with you. Can you please come down?
How exciting.
It was. That was probably the most memorable walk I ever had down West State Street. I can remember distinctly how blue the sky was. It was even bluer when I walked out of the State House after I had that meeting and realized that my entire world had changed with that offer. It was, look, I mean, as a lawyer, there's no greater honor than to be asked to serve on the highest court. It's the greatest privilege a lawyer can hope to have, and to be offered that opportunity was mind-boggling, to say the least.
And we'll be citing the laws that you crafted for generations to come. It's pretty heady stuff.
It was.
So so you talked a little bit about the numeric changes, like the fact that women, the numbers were increasing, but those are nice statistics, but tell us about the meaningful changes that you saw as a result of that time
period.
Yeah.
I think women coming into law at practice levels, at judge levels, at supervisory levels, really had a substantive impact on the law because women brought their own set of judgments and values, certainly to the workplaces in which they populated. We made known, I think, generally what is and is not acceptable behavior to us. I certainly hope everyone did because it makes a difference. And at the same time, laws were developing and evolving, they still are, about what constitutes appropriate environments in the workplace, what's hostile, what is discouraging people from performing at their highest levels, which is really what we all should be doing and wanting in the workforce. So as the laws began to develop statutorily under the law against discrimination, so did the case law develop. And it was only because cases were being brought, people were recognizing behavior to be not something that we wanted to tolerate, that the law was able to advance. I do think women being in the workforce has helped to, in the legal workforce, has helped to change the dynamic, the imbalance, the power imbalance that can exist that permits unacceptable behavior to continue.
Yeah. So before you were appointed to the court, you held these other positions in state government that had historically been held by men, I believe. How did that impact your effectiveness on the job?
Well, certainly The anecdote I told you before about the Office of Administrative Law, I was the first woman who was there. There had been 2 men before. In the Division of Law, there had only ever been 1 previous director, and
That was female.
that was female. And that was the Attorney General who asked me to come be the second one. That was Deborah Ports. Did it make a difference? I think everyone accepts people at face value. So I do think both places were generally accepting. Were there hiccups along the way? Certainly, it did happen. But I do believe that having a female leader, whether it was myself or when I've seen other people be female leaders in business organizations, which is what these were. I was running a law firm, essentially, at the Division of Law. When I ran the Department of Banking and Insurance, that was a business. When I ran the Office of Administrative Law, even though it was a judging business, it was a business. We had deliverables that we had to deliver. We had administrative staff that had to work. Everything had to hum in order for the product to come out in a timely fashion. So what was the difference? I'd like to think that the difference I was able to make, and I think female leaders can make, should make, is to a couple things, if I may. One, I never assumed when it came time to put together a team or consider someone for a promotion or a new challenge, I never assumed that a woman should not be considered and should not be asked to join that opportunity merely because she had children or particularly small children, as if one would assume that because there's too much on somebody's plate, they would not want to accept the challenge. Let that person make the decision. Let them decide whether or not they can absorb an additional responsibility somehow in their personal life. That's for them to decide. 2, I always thought it was unacceptable when I asked particularly a junior woman to accept a new challenge, for her to tell me, I'm not really that comfortable. I'm not sure I can do that. I'm not positive that I'm ready for that yet. Too often, I think young people and younger junior women think that they have to be able to believe by 110 or 20 or 150% that they can really do the job and excel before they're accepted. And I think that's the wrong way to approach things. And I would tell people who told me that they were reluctant to take a challenge, that they were thinking about it in the wrong way. Really what they should be thinking is that here's a supervisor who's recognizing something in you that you may not recognize yet in yourself, that you can stretch, and you should. You should give yourself that chance to stretch, because that's how you develop new muscle memory and be able to take on new challenges. So those were 2 things that I think being a female leader allowed me to advance women. And it wasn't just lawyers. I do think that it's important to remain accessible to everyone in an organization. Even if you're at the top, we all have EQ to greater and lesser extent. You want people to be able to feel like if they really need to, they can come to you. And for me, I tried to reinforce that. And when I think back at my times, I am happy, actually, and proud that I can recall instances when non-lawyers at the Office of Administrative Law, I'll tell you a little story. There was an older woman who worked in our clerk's office processing the paperwork from the agencies or the clients, the attorneys, when they made a filing and made sure everything got to the judge so that the hearings could be conducted. This was very important. We had a whole staff of people who did this. And there was one lady there who was very good, had been there for quite some time. She was an important cog. She asked to talk to me one night after hours. And which was a big deal, right? She came and she said she loved her job. but she was afraid that she was going to have to leave because her husband had lost his job. And he was a very prideful man. And because he did not have work, they would have to leave New Jersey to go live elsewhere with her family. So I asked her what her husband did. I told her to give me his resume. And I sent it around government, and we got him a job. And she never had to leave. But it was because she felt comfortable to share something that was so deeply personal that I was able to do that. I mean, people don't realize things can get done. There are many ways to get things done for people, but they have to be able to feel comfortable that they can come and ask. And that's what I was happy about. It happened again with a judge.
Can I send you my resume?
Yes, but I'm not there anymore. I once had a female judge. Now, you think judges are very confident people, able to handle anything, who similarly asked to come talk to me privately when I was at OAL. And before the door closed, she was in tears. She was in tears because she had extreme anxiety whenever her husband was not close to where they lived, so that, and she was too, so that one of them could get home quickly if one of their children became ill. In OAL, we didn't have enough judges in the Newark location, so we had to take turns sending Trenton judges up to Newark to handle some of the heavier caseloads that needed to be processed in a quick way. Most of them were social services cases, welfare, Medicaid, things like that, some motor vehicles issues. And this judge had her turn to go up to Newark, and she was beside herself that she was going to have to go up the next day, and her husband had a business trip that was taking him out of state. The clerk's office, they hold to the schedule.
Yeah,
they don't want
they
judges
sure do.
looking to get out of their required assignments. So of course, what would you do, right? You know what I did. We changed the schedule. I got coverage for that person, and she didn't have to have that anxiety. And we took steps to make sure that wouldn't happen again, because we would always know when that moment was going to come up in her schedule.
It reminds me of the way Erin and I had to pivot in the early months of COVID, when our team, young children, daycares are closed, they can't go to work because they've got kids home, and even when the schools became open again, they're with their young children trying to stare at a computer, and they're trying to practice law at the same time. I mean, we really had to make accommodations for them, and we feel blessed that we were able to do that. Because I know there's plenty of people out there that didn't have that luxury of having a flexible work employment and didn't have daycare at the same time.
Yeah.
So.
One of the best pieces of advice I ever got when I first began to move into positions where I was the person behind the desk instead of being the person in front of the desk advising that other individual as the number two or as the legal advisor, was if you are in a position of authority and control over something, make sure that you use that position in a way where it made a difference that you were the one that was holding it. Mm-hmm. And I tried to live that. And I tell other people, if they ever get in those situations, to try to do the same thing. We're not placeholders. If we were ever lucky enough to take on those kinds of positions of responsibility. So make yourself felt, right?
So your impact on the legal community over the, 40 years, plus years.
40 plus.
Yeah. What recommendation would you make to the next generation to continue the progress that you've made?
Well, one thing I would say is don't be a go-along. That doesn't help anybody. Speak truth to power, because that's how we do better.
Push back.
Push back when necessary. Certainly did that on the court. Not that that would ever be visible, because much of what we did on the court was behind closed doors in a conference room where it was only the 7 of us, not even the clerk of the court was there to hear some of the private conversations that we had, and no one will ever hear those conversations. But it's important to do that. That's how better decisions get made. And the other thing I would say is don't be afraid to change a position. Change is not weakness. We live to learn, and sometimes the position that we take in the beginning may not ultimately be the one you believe is the right one. So if we can't be flexible and be willing to listen to one another, that's a mistake. If younger lawyers do that, I do have great trust that the law will continue to develop in appropriate ways. I believe that's so. I've seen it in the advocates that have come before us. You know, we are long past the time when the court, and I can speak for the court in this, notices whether or not we have a female or a male lawyer arguing in front of us. That's just not important anymore. What we want, what I wanted, and we all want, are good advocates. We want people who are up there with confidence, who are telling us what they want us to know, who are enjoying the dialogue that they're having with the court, because that's what it is. It's a dialogue. We realize as members of the court that we're talking to the people who know the most about the case that we're responsible for deciding. So we want to get as much information out of them and have them help us decide the case in the best way. And so the best lawyers, male and female, are the ones that get up there and do that and act like they enjoy it.
Fake it till you make it.
Huh?
I fake
Yeah.
it till you make it. I took one case to the New Jersey Supreme Court. It was a name change case. I lost, and the judge on the panel had a hyphenated name, and that was the upshot of my case. Was my client didn't want the child's name to be hyphenated, but now it's the law in the state of New Jersey. You can hyphenate. So you want the Cox Wests are a good example of that. Or I thought it was West Cox. Is it West Cox? Anyway, we need to wrap up, and I unfortunately we've come to the end, Justice Lavecchia. But I have 3 questions for you. We're going to do this rapid fire, okay? And don't think too hard about it.
Okay.
Ready?
Ready.
What life decision did you make that impacted your career most significantly?
I think it was when I wrote to the governor's office and said, if you ever think I can be helpful, I would love to work in the governor's counsel's office.
I'd say that was big.
Yeah,
Wow.
that was a big step for me. I
was
hadn't
brilliant.
thought to ask for something like that before.
In one sentence, what would you say to your teenage self if you could?
Okay, that's a good question. They're all good questions, but I was talking to someone outside.
One sentence.
It's okay to be reserved and not be the first one to speak.
Yes.
I worried about that when I was a kid because I was very quiet and a little shy. So I never thought I could be a lawyer or do something like this.
Yeah. Work to your advantage. And what personality trait has served you best in life?
Probably stick-to-itiveness.
Your grit.
Yeah.
You're a grit gal.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Grit.
Justice Lavecchia. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you, Rosanne. Thank you. You did a great job.